The air in Blackwood Heights doesn't move. It lingers, heavy with the scent of manicured boxwoods and the metallic tang of automated irrigation systems. At 7 a.m., the neighborhood sounds like a Swiss watch, the rhythmic thrum of high-end pool filters and the distant, muffled closing of a soft-close SUV door. This isn't just real estate. It's an ecosystem of curated silence, where wealth is measured by how little you have to acknowledge the existence of other people. I stood on the sidewalk of Crestview Lane, dressed in a faded charcoal hoodie and cargo pants that had seen better days at a construction site. In my hand was a thermal mug of lukewarm coffee and a weathered clipboard. To any passerby, I was a ghost in the machine, a utility worker, a stray, a nuisance. I looked at the property at 442 Crestview, the Sterling estate. It was a brutalist monument of glass and steel that defied the natural slope of the hill, a middle finger to the topography. It was also, quite illegally, 3 feet over the setback line established in the 1994 municipal easement. The wrought iron gate hummed as it slid open, not for me, but for a silver Porsche Taycan idling in the driveway. A man stepped out, his silk polo shirt the color of a Mediterranean afternoon. This was Marcus Sterling, private equity, third-generation ego, and the man who had spent the last 6 months filing quality-of-life complaints against my small, modest bungalow 3 miles down the ridge because my oak tree obstructed the Sunset Corridor. "Hey, yo!" Marcus didn't walk. He drifted, his loafers clicking on the heated cobblestones. He stopped 5 feet away, as if my lack of a tailored blazer created a physical barrier he refused to breach. "The city sent the meter reader a day early," he said, not asking, but stating. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the clipboard. "You're blocking the egress for my guest. Move the truck or I'll have the HOA president call your supervisor before you finish your next sip of that gas station swill." I didn't move. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the coffee. "It's a public easement, Mr. Sterling. The truck is parked legally." Marcus laughed, a short, sharp sound like a dry branch snapping. It was a laugh of a man who had never been told no by someone making less than 6 figures. "Legality is flexible concept in this zip code, friend. You're an eyesore. You're a nuisance neighbor in a literal sense, even if you're just passing through. My neighbors didn't pay $7 million to look at a rusted F-150 and a man who looks like he's scouting for copper wire." He stepped closer now, the smell of Creed Aventus clashing with the morning dew. "I've spent $40,000 in litigation this year alone just to keep this street pure. Do you think I won't spend 10 minutes making sure you're looking for a new job by noon? Leave, now." I checked my watch. 7:12 a.m. The bureaucratic machinery of the county doesn't start grinding until 8 a.m., but I'd already fed the data into the hopper weeks ago. I looked past him at the sprawling cantilevered deck that hung over the ravine. It was beautiful. It was also a structural liability that violated Section 12.4 of the revised zoning code. "The deck is new," I remarked, my voice flat, devoid of the irritation he was trying to provoke. "I noticed the structural supports aren't anchored to the bedrock. You used a friction pile system in a high erosion zone. Bold choice for a man who values purity." Marcus stiffened, his eyes narrowed, the condescension flickering into a brief, hot flash of anger. "You're a technician. Read the meter and get out. Don't pretend you understand the engineering of a home you couldn't afford the property taxes on for a single month." He reached out and flicked the edge of my clipboard with a manicured finger. "Move the truck, or I'll call the police and report a suspicious vehicle. I'll tell them you were filming the interior of the house. In this neighborhood, that's a 2-hour detention and a very uncomfortable conversation for you." I looked at the clipboard. On it was a red-stamped document, a cease and desist order from the county zoning commission, specifically regarding unpermitted expansions in protected riparian buffers. "You should really check your mail, Marcus," I said, finally meeting his eyes. My gaze was clinical, the way a surgeon looks at a tumor they've already decided to excise. The nuisance isn't the truck on the street. The nuisance is the 3,000 square feet of unpermitted luxury currently sitting on top of a protected watershed. Marcus pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over a speed dial contact, likely the chief of police or his personal attorney. "You're done. I'm making the call." I smiled, a thin, cold line. "Make it, but you might want to ask them who signed the warrant for the site inspection at 442 Crestview. It's right there at the bottom of the electronic filing." I turned my back on him and walked toward my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. I could hear him shouting into the phone, his voice rising in pitch, the polished veneer of the elite starting to crack. He thought this was a skirmish about a parking spot. He didn't realize I was here to dismantle his foundation. The clock hit 7:15 a.m. Somewhere in the city, a server refreshed and a stopped work order became a matter of public record.
The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Marcus's thumb frantically scrolling on his screen. He was looking for a name. He found it. I sat in the driver's seat of my truck, the engine idling with a low, unrefined rattle that seemed to offend the very air of the cul-de-sac. I watched him through the rearview mirror. His posture shifted, the aggressive, forward-leaning tilt of a predator suddenly leveled out into the stiff, uncertain stance of a man who had just realized the ice beneath him was paper-thin. The arrival of the black SUVs was synchronized, a choreographed entry that signaled the end of the private era of Crestview Lane. These weren't police cruisers with flashing lights and bravado. These were nondescript government vehicles, matte black and silent. 3 men and 2 women stepped out, dressed in the tactical professional attire of the County Building Safety and Environment Division. Leading them was Elena Vance. Elena was my lead compliance officer, a woman who treated building codes with the same reverence a Jesuit priest treats scripture. She didn't look at Marcus. She walked straight to my window. "The digital filing went through at 08 sharp, Commissioner," she said, her voice carrying across the driveway. "The Sheriff's Department has been notified that this is now a restricted site. We have the soil engineers 10 minutes out." I stepped out of the truck. The faded hoodie stayed on, but the power dynamic had shifted so violently that Marcus looked physically smaller. He was still holding his phone, but his hand was trembling. "Commissioner?" Marcus managed to choke out the word. The arrogance had been replaced by a frantic, high-speed calculation. He was trying to find a bridge back to my good graces, but he had already burned it. "There's been a mistake. My architects, they handled all the permitting. This is a clerical error. We can go inside, have a drink, and call the director. I know David personally." "David retired 3 weeks ago, Marcus," I said, walking toward the edge of his cantilevered deck. "I'm his replacement, and unlike David, I don't play golf at the club." I gestured to Elena, who began unfurling a topographic map across the hood of Marcus's Porsche. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Let's talk about your purity," I continued, my tone cold and clinical. "This estate was built on a Tier 1 protected riparian buffer. Under the 2024 Green Initiative Act, any permanent structure built within 50 feet of that streambed requires a federal environmental impact study. Your records show you filed it as a temporary garden gazebo." I pointed to the massive steel beams anchored into the hillside. "That's not a gazebo. That's 300 tons of concrete and structural steel that is currently redirecting groundwater runoff directly into the public reservoir system. You didn't just break a zoning rule, Marcus. You committed a felony-grade environmental violation to get a better view of the valley." Marcus's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray. "I can fix it. I'll pay the fines. Just tell me the number. Whatever the mitigation fee is, I'll double it." This isn't a negotiation in a boardroom. This is a civil enforcement action. You treated your neighbors like obstacles to be cleared. You used your legal team to harass me for 6 months because my oak tree offended you. But while you were looking at my tree, I was looking at your foundation. The collapse was psychological first. Marcus looked at his house, his monument to himself, and for the first time, he didn't see an asset, he saw a liability. Elena began taping the orange "unsafe for occupancy" notices directly onto the floor-to-ceiling glass panes of his front door. "You can't do this," Marcus whispered, though the conviction was gone. "This house is my collateral for the Meridian acquisition. If there's a cloud on the title, if the occupancy is pulled, then the bank triggers the material adverse change clause in your loan agreement," I finished for him. I knew his financials better than he did at that moment. The credit line freezes, the acquisition fails, and the HOA, the one you've used as a weapon for years, will be forced to sue you to protect the neighborhood's collective property value from the environmental lawsuits I'm about to file. I stepped closer, invading his personal space just as he had done to me minutes earlier. "You call me a nuisance neighbor. In the eyes of the law, Marcus, you are the nuisance, a structural, environmental, and legal nuisance that needs to be abated." One of the engineers arrived with a ground-penetrating radar unit, and as they began to roll it across the cobblestones, the sound, a low, rhythmic clicking, sounded like a countdown. "The hierarchy of this street has changed. You aren't the king of the hill. You're a tenant in a condemned building." Marcus dropped his phone. It clattered against the stones, the screen shattering. He didn't even reach for it. He just stared at the orange stickers, his mouth hanging slightly open, the realization finally sinking in. The man in the charcoal hoodie didn't just want an apology. I wanted the house. The heavy, rhythmic thunk of a pneumatic drill began to echo off the canyon walls. My team wasn't just here to look, they were here to core sample the arrogance right out of the soil. The nuisance had officially become a crime scene. By noon, the transformation was total. The Sterling estate, once the crown jewel of Blackwood Heights, was draped in yellow caution tape. It looked like a discarded toy. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the neighborhood's elite watch us. Behind their curtains, the high-status neighbors were terrified. They knew that if the zoning commissioner was willing to dismantle Marcus Sterling, none of them were safe. I called a meeting on the sidewalk. Not a formal hearing, a summary judgment. "Elena," I said, loud enough for the gathering crowd of neighbors to hear, "I want the immediate revocation of the variance for the entire Crestview cul-de-sac. Every fence over 6 feet comes down. Every unpermitted infinity pool that sits on the drainage easement gets a drain and fill order. We're restoring the natural watershed, starting today." The murmurs from the neighbors were a mix of horror and sudden frantic politeness. They weren't looking at my cargo pants anymore. They were looking at the power to erase their home equity with a single stroke of a pen. I walked over to Marcus. He was sitting on his stone retaining wall, his Mediterranean blue polo stained with sweat. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire identity get repossessed. "You said you spent $40,000 in litigation to keep this street pure," I said, standing over him. "I spent my morning signing the orders that will cost you $4 million in remediation. That's the difference between us, Marcus. You use the law as a shield for your vanity. I use it as a scalpel for the truth." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "Where am I supposed to go? The bank They already called. They saw the unsafe for occupancy filing on the portal. They're freezing everything. There's a motel 6 miles down the ridge, I replied, my voice devoid of malice or triumph, just the cold facts. It's built to code. It's modest. It's exactly the kind of place you spent your life looking down on. I suggest you get used to the view. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a falling blade. You thought you were the one who decided who belonged here. You thought status was something you bought with square footage and harassment. But status is fleeting. Authority is permanent when it's backed by the facts you ignored. I turned to Elena. If he isn't off the property by sunset, call the sheriff for a trespass violation. This land is now under county receivership for environmental restoration. I walked back to my F-150. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I felt the quiet, steady satisfaction of a gear finally clicking into its proper place. As I pulled away, I saw Marcus Sterling standing at his gate, the same gate he had used to try and intimidate me that morning. He was trying to punch in the code to get back in, but the power had already been cut. The hum was gone. The silence of Blackwood Heights was finally, for once, earned. Status is a performance. Worth is a foundation. Marcus built his life on a cantilever, hanging over a void, praying the wind wouldn't blow. I'm the wind.